moment I realized that the movement was real was when we were marching in Sacramento and people were yelling, "What do we want? Healing. When do we want it? Now." For me, it was a movement that I could be a part of because that's what I wanted as a child. I wanted healing.
Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, it's a movement that I feel has grown organically.
When Lenore called me and said, "Hey, Akilah, this is what I'm thinking about doing. We need to organize victims and survivors in the community and rally them around the change that needs to take place." And I was like, yeah, this is it. I feel so humbled to be a part of such a powerful movement that has changed so many lives. And also, that has literally changed the narrative in the state. And now we're about to change the whole narrative in the country around who victims are and what victims want and how we leverage our collective voice to make change in our neighborhoods.
So when we first started Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice, one of the exercises that we did was building laws and legislative asks that were based on our life stories, right? What's Sujata's law? What's Sonia's law? What's Akilah's law? What is the law of those of us who have lived through things and have wisdom to tell you how to survive and thrive? And can we build legislation around the living?
We thought that an important step forward was to begin convening and elevating the voices of people who've been drowned out of the criminal justice policy discussion over the last 25 years.
When we started this and we started talking about what are the needs that are unmet in our communities, so many of them were unmet because the focus had been on retribution and punitiveness instead of on what do people need in terms of prevention. And so what does that look like in terms of policy asks for things like trauma and recovery centers, right? Trauma and recovery center is the reason I am here today, right? It's the reason I am alive and I survived.
I think that one of the great measures of our success is the expansion of trauma recovery services. That's huge. When we first started, there was only one trauma recovery center, and now there are 11, and it's absolutely a brilliant model. That, in and of itself, providing services in communities most impacted by violent crime, is prevention. A very beautiful, healing, uplifting form of crime prevention.
By talking to folks who are directly impacted, lifting those voices up, developing that leadership, you have the solutions to the cycle of crime right there in front of you.
Breaking silence individually and even more powerfully collectively is prevention because it names the harm. When we name it, then we can say no more. And when we say it with a collective voice, the power in that is unimaginable.
I feel like the most exciting part of Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice has been Survivor Speaks and its evolution over the last 5 years. Going from doing a one-day rally to this amazing set of conferences every year where survivors have said, I've never been to anything like this before. I've never experienced anything like this before. I've never felt seen like this before. I've never felt like my experiences were at the center like this before.
When you start listening, you start really feeling what that person feels. You discover that their story might be in a different way, but it's your same story.
You want to tell your story and you want to hear other stories. So it's like this perfect marriage of people coming together that want to talk and want to hear and would like to see you coming through that successfully.
When I went to the first Survivor Speak conference, I cried all night after the first session. To sit in a room with 500 people who get it was life-changing. I just fit right in.
This is a collective healing process, and we really are creating a community around healing. That's what's so exciting about Survivor Speak, because people then take that energy back to their own communities and to their own families.
I think that the more spaces that we have where people are actually able to speak on what they're dealing with, we will continue to tear down the stigma around being a victim in order for us to move on to being a survivor. Once we heal, we have growth and grace and peace.
The very first time I stood up and spoke in front of a legislative body, there was something that shifted inside of me. I realized that this was a place I needed to be speaking up from my own life story to say this is what we need to be doing instead.
I remember one of those first meetings where we sat down with a legislator, and when our crime survivor members started talking and saying, we're crime survivors and we want to see less incarceration and more rehabilitation and treatment, he stopped and looked up and said, where have you been for the last 30 years?
I realized in that moment that, they've been waiting for us, right? They needed the voices of survivors that were changing the narrative, that were saying, we want to heal, we want more trauma recovery services for ourselves, we want less incarceration for others. And that is actually what crime survivors want.
Right now, it's surreal to know that we have impacted victims, their families, their loved ones, communities where hope seem to just be vanishing. When I talk about my organization, I talk about my family.
I've never met a group that is more cohesive and grounded in love.
Being together in community and doing something that matters brings me a ton of joy.
I am incredibly grateful for walking into a room with a whole bunch of people who have varied survivor histories, but all of us bring that to the table. There's no shame or hiding it. We walk into the room as survivors, and all the ways in which our survivor histories show up for us in the work is a part of the work.
My voice is heard and listened to and wanted. That feels great.
I think to be in these spaces where you realize you're not alone, you realize that there is hope out there and that actually my voice means something, that's really what Crime Survivors for Safety and Justice is trying to achieve. We're here, we're together, and we're winning.